You ruined everything. My daughter's scream cut through the Thanksgiving dinner like a knife. She stood at the head of the table, mascara running down her face, pointing at me with trembling hands. Her husband, Mark, sat frozen beside her, his face drained of all color, as I calmly placed a manila folder on the table between the untouched turkey and mashed potatoes. I'd been a criminal defense attorney for 34 years. I knew how to build an airtight case. And Mark had no idea that for the past 6 weeks I'd been gathering evidence that would destroy the lie he'd built his entire marriage on. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old retired attorney ended up being accused of ruining her own daughter's life on Thanksgiving, the one day families are supposed to come together. And why I'm standing here completely calm while my daughter sobs and her husband looks like he's about to run. Let me take you back 6 weeks. Because what Mark forgot is that before I defended clients, I learned how to investigate them. And I just discovered my son-in-law had been living a lie for 7 years. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 67 years old, a retired criminal defense attorney who spent 3 decades building cases that prosecutors couldn't dismantle. I defended over 200 clients, won 70% of my trials, and built a reputation for finding the truth buried under layers of deception. But nothing in my career prepared me for the moment I discovered my daughter's husband, the man she'd trusted with her life for 7 years, had been hiding a secret that could destroy her future. 6 weeks ago, on a Saturday afternoon around 3 p.m., I was helping Sarah pack up their garage when I found a box labeled Mark College Years. Inside were old textbooks, a fraternity t-shirt, and a manila envelope that had fallen open. Credit card statements from 2019, a bank notice about a joint account in Mark's name and someone else's, a woman named Jennifer Hartley. Final notice for a mortgage payment on a property in Columbus, Ohio, $340,000 outstanding. My hands went cold as I held those papers under the garage fluorescent lights. Sarah and Mark lived in Seattle. Mark had told us he'd never owned property before their condo. But here was documentation showing he'd co-signed a mortgage with another woman just 1 year before marrying my daughter. This wasn't an old college debt. The dates overlapped with his engagement to Sarah. But what I discovered when I started digging into public records made that seem like nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling something was deeply wrong. On Tuesday morning, I ran a basic property search using Mark's full name, Marcus Hartley. That's when I found it. Marriage certificate filed in Franklin County, Ohio, dated June 15, 2016. Marcus Hartley married to Jennifer Lynn Patterson. No divorce decree on file. My daughter married Mark on September 8, 2017. I stared at my laptop screen for 20 minutes, rereading those dates. Mark had married Sarah while still legally married to someone else. He'd committed bigamy. Every anniversary they'd celebrated, every tax return they'd filed jointly, built on a legal impossibility. I immediately called my former paralegal, David, who still had access to databases I'd used for investigations. His voice was tight when he called back 2 hours later. "Margaret, there's more. Jennifer Hartley filed a missing persons report on Marcus in 2018, and there's an active child support order for a son born in 2015. He owes $47,000 in back payments." 3 days later, I found Jennifer Hartley on Facebook. I sent her a carefully worded message explaining I was conducting research related to Marcus Hartley and asked if she'd be willing to speak. She called me within an hour. What she told me made my blood run cold. Mark hadn't just abandoned her, He'd drained their joint savings account of $89,000. Told her he was going on a business trip to Seattle for his tech job and never came back. She'd been raising their son Ethan alone for 6 years, working 2 jobs to cover the mortgage he'd left her with. She'd tried finding him, but he'd changed his phone number, deleted all social media, and seemingly vanished. "I got a child support order," Jennifer said, her voice breaking, "but I never found him to serve it. It's like he became a ghost." I sat in my home office for a long time after that call, staring at my daughter's wedding photo on my desk. That's when I understood. I had spent 30 years building cases to protect people from deception. Now I needed to build one strong enough to save my daughter from a fraud who'd constructed an entire false identity. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't rush to Sarah with accusations she'd refused to believe. I would do what I'd always done in court. Build a case with documentation so thorough that denial would be impossible. I called my colleague Richard Torres, a private investigator who'd worked with me on dozens of cases. When I showed him what I'd found, he let out a low whistle. "Margaret," he said, his voice serious, "this isn't just infidelity or financial problems. This is identity fraud, bigamy, child abandonment, and financial exploitation. Your daughter could be liable for his debts. You need to move fast." That afternoon, I began assembling the evidence that would dismantle Mark's carefully constructed lie, piece by piece. Over the next 6 weeks, I became relentless. I obtained certified copies of Mark's marriage certificate to Jennifer. I documented the missing persons report and child support order. I hired Richard to surveil Mark and discovered he was using a credit card in Sarah's name without her knowledge, another $23,000 in hidden debt. I contacted Jennifer and got her sworn testimony. I compiled financial records showing money disappearing from Sarah's accounts. I gathered proof of every lie Mark had told. His dead parents, who were actually alive in Ohio. His only child status, despite having a son. His clean financial history, covering massive fraud. I scheduled Thanksgiving dinner at my house, because I knew when I presented this evidence, Mark's performance would crumble, and my daughter would finally see the truth. But to understand why this moment felt like watching my daughter walk toward a cliff edge I couldn't stop, you need to know one thing. I had warned her about Mark from the beginning. It was 2017. Sarah brought him to Sunday dinner, beaming, announcing they'd gotten engaged after 6 months of dating. Mark was charming, attentive, said all the right things. But something about his story felt rehearsed. The way he mentioned his late parents without emotion, how he deflected questions about his past with humor, the vagueness about his job history. I'd cross-examined hundreds of witnesses. I knew evasion when I saw it. I'd pulled Sarah aside that night. "Honey, have you done any background research? Checked his credit, met his family, seen documentation of anything he's told you?" She'd looked at me like I was paranoid. "Mom, not everyone is a criminal. He's a good man. You're being your lawyer self instead of just being happy for me." I'd backed off. My husband Richard had passed away 2 years earlier from a heart attack, and Sarah accused me of being overprotective since losing him. So I attended their courthouse wedding, smiled for photos, and told myself I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong. And now, 4 years into their marriage, I'd discovered my daughter had been living with a man who'd abandoned his first wife and child, stolen from multiple people, and constructed an identity built entirely on lies. The house Sarah thought they owned together? The down payment came from money Mark had stolen. Every promise he'd made was worthless. Now, Standing in my dining room as my daughter carved a turkey next to a man who defrauded her from day one, I understood something with perfect clarity. Some structures look solid until you examine the foundation. And Mark's foundation was built on fraud that was about to collapse. Richard Torres met me at a coffee shop 3 days after I'd found Jennifer. He slid a folder across the table, his expression grim. "Marcus, this is worse than we thought. Mark, or Marcus, whatever he's calling himself, has done this before. There's a marriage certificate in Michigan from 2012 to a woman named Amy Rodriguez. Also, no divorce on file." I felt my stomach drop. He's married to 3 women? Technically, yes. Amy filed for an annulment in 2014 after discovering he'd drained her inheritance, $67,000, and disappeared. But the annulment was never finalized because she couldn't locate him to serve papers. Jennifer's the legal wife. Your daughter's marriage isn't legally valid. That's when I understood the full scope of Mark's pattern. He was a serial bigamist who targeted women with stable incomes and savings, married them, extracted their resources, and vanished before consequences caught up. Sarah was just his latest victim, except this time he'd stayed longer, which meant the damage was deeper. I contacted Margaret Foster, an attorney specializing in fraud and family law. When I showed her my documentation, she moved quickly. We filed paperwork to protect Sarah's assets, froze the joint accounts Mark had access to, and documented every fraudulent transaction. She prepared restraining orders and contacted law enforcement in 3 states where Mark had active warrants I hadn't even known about. Fraud in Michigan, identity theft in Ohio, failure to appear on the child support case. "Your daughter needs to file for annulment immediately," Margaret advised. "And she needs to know that any debts he's incurred in her name she could be liable for, unless we prove she had no knowledge of his fraud." But I knew Sarah wouldn't believe me without overwhelming proof. She loved Mark. She'd defended him against my initial concerns. She'd planned their future, children, a bigger house, retirement. Telling her the man she'd built her life with would shatter her, but not telling her would destroy her financially and legally. Richard's surveillance over the next month revealed more damaging evidence. Mark met regularly with a woman named Lisa at a hotel, his 4th concurrent relationship. He'd opened credit cards in Sarah's name using forged signatures, accumulating $23,000 in debt my daughter knew nothing about. He'd told Sarah his tech job paid $95,000, but Richard confirmed he'd been fired 8 months earlier and was living entirely off her income and credit. The business trips he took monthly? Visits to Lisa, funded by Sarah's credit cards. I found the most damning evidence 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Hidden in Mark's car, which he'd left unlocked in my driveway during a Sunday visit, was a laptop bag. Inside, I found a second phone. Text messages to Jennifer from 2 months ago. "I'm sorry I disappeared. I made mistakes. I want to meet Ethan and make things right." But he'd never followed through. Messages to Lisa. "Just a few more months, and I'll have enough to leave. She has no idea." I sat in my car staring at those messages for a long time. Mark wasn't even pretending to build a real life with Sarah. She was a resource to drain, nothing more. The moment he'd extracted enough, he'd vanish like he had with Amy and Jennifer. That night, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. I thought about the Sarah who'd laughed in my kitchen last Sunday, talking about baby names, showing me paint samples for the nursery they were planning. If I exposed Mark, I'd destroy those dreams. But if I didn't, he'd disappear with everything she'd worked for, and possibly leave her facing legal consequences for debts and fraud she'd had no part in creating. I remembered something Richard had told me before he died, watching me preparing for a particularly brutal trial. Building a strong defense means knowing when the foundation is compromised. You can't save a structure by ignoring the cracks. Sarah's marriage was built on cracks so deep the whole thing was about to collapse. And I'd rather she learn the truth while she still had resources and legal options than after Mark disappeared and left her with nothing. I made copies of everything. I prepared a chronological report with documentation, marriage certificates, financial records, sworn testimony from Jennifer and Amy, surveillance photos, credit reports, text messages, criminal records. I contacted Adult Protective Services because at 67, I qualified as vulnerable under elder fraud statutes if Mark had been manipulating me financially as well. I briefed Margaret Foster on presenting the evidence in a way that would protect Sarah legally. I called my sister Patricia, who'd always been Sarah's favorite aunt. I need you at Thanksgiving. When I tell Sarah, she's going to need family who loves her. Patricia's voice was steady. I'll be there, whatever she needs. The walls were closing in on Mark, but he had no idea. He thought he was safe, that his charm and Sarah's trust would protect him indefinitely. He'd forgotten one critical thing. I'd spent 3 decades cross-examining liars, and I'd built a case that would prove, beyond any doubt, that the man my daughter married didn't exist. The real Marcus Hartley was a predator, and his time had run out. Thanksgiving Day, 2:47 p.m. Sarah and Mark arrived carrying wine and pumpkin pie, smiling like the perfect couple. My sister Patricia was already there, along with Margaret Foster, who I'd introduced as an old colleague joining us for the holiday. Mark shook everyone's hands, laughing, complimenting my cooking. We sat down to dinner. Normal conversation, work, weather, holiday plans. I waited until everyone had filled their plates. Then I stood up. Before we eat, I need to discuss something important. My voice was calm, steady, the same tone I'd used delivering opening statements for 3 decades. Mark, I've discovered information about your past that Sarah needs to know. Sarah's face tightened. Mom, not today, please. But I'd already opened the folder. 6 weeks ago, I found documentation showing you co-signed a mortgage with Jennifer Hartley in 2016. You told Sarah you'd never owned property before your condo. Mark's smile didn't falter, but his knuckles went white. That was a business investment that didn't work out. I didn't want to burden Sarah with old financial mistakes. I placed the first document on the table. This is your marriage certificate to Jennifer Lynn Patterson, dated June 15, 2016. There's no divorce decree on file. You married Sarah on September 8, 2017, while still legally married to Jennifer. The color drained from Mark's face. Sarah stared at the document, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. That has to be a mistake, Mark stammered. I placed another document down. This is Jennifer's missing persons report from 2018. This is the child support order for your son Ethan, born in 2015. You owe $47,000 in back payments. Mom, what are you doing? Sarah's voice cracked. I kept going, my attorney voice unwavering. This is your marriage certificate to Amy Rodriguez from 2012. Also, no divorce on file. Bank statements showing you drained $67,000 from her account before disappearing. This is surveillance footage from the past month showing you meeting Lisa Morrison at a hotel funded by credit cards opened in Sarah's name without her knowledge. $23,000 in debt she doesn't know exists. Mark stood up suddenly, his chair scraping. You went through my private... This is insane. I found evidence in my driveway, in a vehicle parked on my property. I placed the final stack of papers down. These are certified records from law enforcement in 3 states. You have active warrants for fraud in Michigan, identity theft in Ohio, and failure to appear on child support proceedings. Your real name is Marcus Hartley. You've been married to at least 3 women simultaneously. You're facing criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. That's when Sarah screamed. You ruined everything! She shot to her feet, mascara running, pointing at me with shaking hands. You couldn't just let me be happy. You had to destroy the one good thing in my life. I stayed completely calm. Sarah, the man you married doesn't exist. Marcus Hartley is a predator who... Get out! Mark's voice exploded across the room. You paranoid, bitter old woman, you've been trying to sabotage us since day 1. I pulled out my phone, which had been recording in my pocket. Everything you've said has been documented. Margaret Foster is an attorney specializing in fraud. She's already filed protective orders and contacted law enforcement. And Detective Harrison from Seattle PD is outside right now, waiting to serve arrest warrants. The doorbell rang. Mark's face went from red to ash gray in seconds. Sarah collapsed into her chair, staring at the pile of documents like they were written in a foreign language. Patricia moved to Sarah's side immediately, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I walked to the door and opened it. Detective Harrison stood there with another officer, holding paperwork. Margaret Chen? We're here to speak with Marcus Hartley. I gestured inside. He's in the dining room. Mark tried to run toward the back door, but the second officer was already there. They read him his rights while Sarah watched, silent tears streaming down her face. As they let him out in handcuffs, he didn't look at her once. The door closed. The house fell silent, except for Sarah's quiet sobbing. The officers left, taking Marcus, away. Margaret Foster stayed long enough to explain the legal steps: annulment filing, fraud protection, asset recovery. Patricia held Sarah while she cried, unable to speak. I sat down beside my daughter, the Thanksgiving meal cold and untouched on the table. I know you hate me right now. I don't hate you, Sarah whispered, her voice broken. How did I not see it? Because he's done this before. He's skilled at deception. This wasn't your fault. 7 years, Mom. 7 years of my life with someone who didn't exist. 2 months later, a letter arrived from Mark's attorney. He'd pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and bigamy across 3 states in exchange for reduced sentencing, 6 years. His letter, enclosed separately, was brief. I'm sorry I wasn't who you thought I was. I never meant to hurt you. Sarah read it once and threw it away. He's still lying. He absolutely meant to hurt me. He just didn't mean to get caught. 8 months later, Sarah sat across from me at Sunday brunch, a tradition we'd restarted. Her annulment was finalized. Her credit was being repaired. Jennifer Hartley had connected with her, and they'd become unlikely friends, united by shared experience. Sarah looked different now, stronger, clearer-eyed, she said cautiously. He's a teacher. I ran a full background check. I smiled. Good. She reached across and squeezed my hand. Thank you for ruining everything. Because what you really did was save me from someone who'd already ruined himself. I just couldn't see it yet.